Somewhere on this planet, there is a pool of water so blue it looks artificial. It sits at the bottom of a canyon almost no one knows the name of. No road leads directly to it, no skyline, no signposts, just stone walls rising hundreds of feet on every side, and a single pocket of turquoise water resting at the base, as if the earth had decided to hide one of its most beautiful creations in the place least likely to be found. And it is not alone. Across the world, there are natural wonders that almost never appear on any list. Wonders that should be famous, but aren't. A desert that bleeds red into the ocean. A lake that turns to glass and reflects an entire sky. A cave system so vast it contains its own weather. A mountain that glows from within at night. Forests where the trees are older than most written history. These places exist right now. They are not legends. They are not myths. They are simply hidden, ignored, or forgotten, while the same handful of famous landmarks absorb all the attention. And once you start looking at them honestly, something becomes very clear. The most extraordinary places on Earth are not always the ones people talk about. There is a strange logic to fame. A few natural sites become global icons, photographed millions of times, repeated across every travel list, every documentary, every postcard. And then, just beyond them, there are landscapes of equal or greater power that almost no one mentions. Not because they are smaller, not because they are less beautiful, but because they are remote, difficult, unfamiliar, or simply outside the usual story the world tells about itself. This video is about those places, not the obvious ones, not the names you already know, the ones the algorithm rarely surfaces, the ones travel agencies don't sell, the ones that, when you finally see them, force a quiet recalibration of what you thought the planet was capable of. Some of them are ancient. Some of them are still forming. Some of them break the rules you assumed landscapes had to follow. And to begin, we go to a place where the ground stops following the rules. Segment 1. The stone towers that should not be standing. In central China, in a region called Zhangjiajie, the land does something almost impossible to describe in normal terms. It splits into thousands of vertical stone columns rising directly out of dense subtropical forest, some of them more than 1,000 feet tall. There are no slopes leading up to them, no ridges connecting them, no gradual transition from ground to summit, just stone, lifting straight into the air, separated by narrow voids of empty space. From above, it looks structured, almost geometric. From below, it looks unfinished. And when the morning fog rolls in, the lower halves of the pillars vanish entirely, leaving only their upper sections suspended above a layer of cloud, as if they were floating. That image is not an illusion. It is the result of something more interesting. Hundreds of millions of years ago, this entire region was a single, continuous sandstone plateau formed under ancient seas. Tectonic forces lifted it above sea level, and from that moment, water and time began to take it apart. Rain widened the cracks. Frost expanded them. Softer rock collapsed. Denser rock resisted. And over millions of years, almost the entire plateau disappeared. What you see today is not what was built here. It is what time failed to erase. Each pillar is a remnant, a surviving fragment of a landscape that no longer exists. And once you understand that, the place stops feeling impossible and starts feeling honest. You are not looking at a mountain range. You are looking at the last standing pieces of one. Almost no traveler outside Asia knows this place by name. It rarely appears on global Wonders of the World lists. And yet it is one of the clearest examples on the planet of what erosion can do when given enough time and the right kind of stone. Most landscapes are observed early in that process. Zhangjiajie shows you the late stage, the version that survives after almost everything else has been removed. Segment 2. The passage through the mountain. Not far from those pillars, the same region holds something even stranger. A mountain with a hole through it. Tianmen Mountain rises sharply from the surrounding terrain, and at its summit, instead of ending in a peak, it opens. A natural arch cuts directly through the rock, more than 400 feet high and nearly 200 feet wide. Large enough that from a distance, it changes the entire silhouette of the mountain. To reach it, you climb 999 stone steps, set in a single steep line that does not curve, does not flatten, and does not forgive hesitation. The valley falls away behind you with every step. The wind sharpens, and then at the top, the mountain stops being a wall and becomes a doorway. Stand inside the opening, and the experience shifts. On one side, the slope you climbed. On the other, open air falling into a valley far below. Wind moves continuously through the gap, accelerated by the narrowing rock, creating a low, constant pressure across the body. Sound changes. Light changes. The mountain stops feeling like a fixed object and starts feeling like a threshold between two states. Nothing here was designed. The arch formed through collapse and erosion working in precise balance. Remove a little less material and the opening never appears. Remove a little more and the entire structure fails. What survives is the exact midpoint between those extremes. And that midpoint is what you walk through. For centuries, the local interpretation has been spiritual, a doorway between worlds, a point of passage rather than arrival. You don't have to share that interpretation to feel why it exists. The place itself suggests it. Segment 3. The labyrinth made from an ancient sea. In the southwest of the same country, the ground does something else again. It fractures into blades. In a region called Shilin, limestone rises in thousands of narrow vertical formations, some more than 100 feet tall, their edges sharp enough to look almost cut. There is no open terrain, no clearings, only stone walls, narrow corridors, and tight passages where movement becomes deliberate and visibility collapses. This is not a forest of trees. It is a 270 million year old seabed turned into a maze. During the Permian period, this entire region lay beneath a shallow tropical sea. Layers of shells and coral compressed into thick beds of limestone. Then the sea retreated. The land rose, and over millions of years, rainwater, slightly acidic from absorbed carbon dioxide, slowly dissolved the softer rock and left the harder portions standing. What survived hardened into shape. What didn't disappeared. At ground level, you stop being an observer and become a navigator. Sound bends. Distance becomes unreliable. Every turn leads into another corridor that looks almost identical to the last. And then, occasionally, the maze opens. A still pool reflects the limestone blades above it, doubling their height for a moment before another corridor swallows you again. Most people have never heard of Shilin. It rarely appears in mainstream travel coverage, and yet it is one of the most complete examples on Earth of a landscape carved entirely by absence. A place where what is no longer there matters more than what remains. Segment 4. The Land of Color. Further north, the Earth changes again. This time, it changes color. In Zhangye Danxia, in northern China, entire mountains are layered in red, orange, yellow, and white. the bands flowing across ridges and folds in patterns that look almost painted. From the air, it can feel as though someone has stretched fabric across the land. But none of it is surface coloring. These bands are structure. During the Cretaceous period, layers of sediment built up here over millions of years, each one carrying a different mineral composition. Iron oxidized into red. Other minerals introduced yellow and white. Then tectonic collisions tilted the layers upward, exposing them at angles, and erosion did the rest. It did not destroy the structure, it revealed it. What you see today is a record of geological time, made visible at scale. Every band marks a different era. Every fold records a different pressure. Every color is the trace of a different chemistry. You are not looking at decoration. You are reading time. And as light moves across the formations, the experience shifts. At sunrise, shadows define depth. At midday, the contrast flattens. At sunset, the reds intensify, almost glowing, reflecting the same iron that originally created them. Zhangye is not unknown locally, but on a global scale, it remains one of the most underrepresented landscapes on Earth. A place where the planet writes its own history in pigment, and almost no one outside the region ever sees it directly. Segment 5. The forest that time forgot now leave the rock behind and move west, into a country most travel lists never associate with forests at all. Iran. Along the northern edge of the country, where the Alborz Mountains catch moist air rising from the Caspian Sea, something ancient survives. The Hyrcanian forests stretch across the slopes in a band of dense green that has existed in some form for tens of millions of years. They are remnants of a forest type that once covered much of the northern hemisphere and has since vanished almost everywhere else. In a country most outsiders imagine as desert, this is the correction. The trees here rise high enough that the canopy filters light long before it reaches the ground. The air is heavier, the silence is denser. The forest floor is dark and humid, layered with moss, fallen wood, and the slow chemistry of decomposition that has been running uninterrupted for millions of years. A few hundred miles south, the Lut Desert reaches some of the highest surface temperatures ever recorded on Earth. Here, in the same country, mist drifts between trees that predate most civilizations. That contradiction is the real Iran most foreigners never see. Not a single climate, not a single landscape, but a country built out of opposites. The Hyrcanian forests are a UNESCO-listed natural site, and yet outside specialist circles, they remain almost completely unknown. They do not appear in mainstream travel content. They are not on the tourist circuit, and that is exactly why they belong here. A living fragment of a prehistoric world, hiding inside a country the world thinks it already understands. Segment 6. The planet breaking open crossed the Red Sea, and the ground does something almost no other place on Earth does. It opens. In northern Ethiopia, the Danakil Depression sits more than 300 feet below sea level and regularly registers among the hottest inhabited places on the planet. Daytime temperatures often exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The ground temperature climbs higher still. But heat is not what makes this place strange. 3 tectonic plates meet here, slowly pulling apart from each other. The African continent is, very literally, splitting open along this line. Over the next several million years, this depression will widen, deepen, and eventually flood, becoming a new sea. You are looking at the early stage of an ocean. At Dalol, in the heart of the depression, the surface looks unrecognizable. Bright yellow crusts of sulfur, pools of green and orange acid. Salt formations in shapes that don't seem to belong to any standard landscape. Steam rises in thin lines from cracks in the ground. Gas drifts slowly across the surface. Nothing here feels stable. And yet people live and work in this region. Salt miners walk these flats almost daily, cutting blocks of crystallized salt by hand and loading them onto camels, following routes that have existed for centuries. They know which ground is solid and which is thin. They read the surface the way other people read maps. Almost no traveler ever comes here. The conditions are extreme, the access is difficult, and the political situation has often been complicated. But for a brief window in time, the Danakil remains one of the only places on Earth where you can stand on a continent as it tears itself apart. That is not a metaphor. That is the literal description. Segment 7. The churches beneath the ground. A few hundred miles to the west, in the Ethiopian highlands, the same country offers a wonder of a completely different kind. Not natural, but built into nature so deeply that the line between the two disappears. At Lalibela, 11 medieval churches were carved directly into solid volcanic rock in the 12th and 13th centuries, not built upward from the ground, cut downward into it. Each church is a single continuous block of stone. Walls, columns, doorways, windows, roofs, none of it was assembled. All of it was revealed by removing material. There was no margin for error. A wrong cut could not be filled in. A misjudged angle could not be corrected, and yet the entire system holds. Lines stay straight. Symmetry survives. Tunnels link the churches underground, forming a network you only fully understand once you are inside it. Walk the trenches and the outside world disappears. Sound drops, temperature drops, light enters in narrow shafts from above. The space stops feeling like architecture and starts feeling like geology with intention. Lalibela is still active. Pilgrims walk these passages every day, dressed in white, praying in spaces that have been used continuously for nearly 900 years. It is not a ruin. It is not a museum. It is one of the most remarkable human achievements on the planet, and outside specific circles, it almost never gets discussed in the same breath as the famous wonders most people learn about in school. It should be. Segment 8. The mountain that stands alone back in eastern China. One more landscape resists the usual categories. Fanjingshan rises more than 8,000 feet above the surrounding terrain, isolated from any larger range, often surrounded entirely by cloud. More than 65 million years old, it was lifted and preserved while everything around it eroded away. What remains is a single mass of ancient rock, standing alone above the present landscape. There is no gradual transition, no connecting ridges. The mountain begins where the land ends. Near the summit, the rock narrows into a single vertical column known as the Red Cloud Golden Summit, split at the top into two thin peaks by a deep fissure. Connecting those two peaks is a small stone bridge, and on either side of the bridge, two small temples, built at one of the most exposed points of the entire range. There is no obvious reason to put a temple there. Wind moves continuously through the gap. Clouds form and dissolve within minutes. Visibility shifts constantly, and the climb to reach this point requires more than 8,000 stone steps through dense forest before the summit is even visible. That is the point. The structures were not placed there for convenience. They were placed there because the location forces a particular kind of awareness. By the time you arrive, the climb has stripped away everything unnecessary, and what remains is the mountain, the sky, and your position between them. Fanjingshan is one of the oldest exposed pieces of rock in this part of the world and one of the least visited high-elevation sites on the continent. The Guizhou golden snub-nosed monkey, found nowhere else on Earth, lives only in the narrow ecological band around this single mountain. Isolation here did not erase life. It selected it. Segment 9. Life at the Edge of the Sky. Return to Ethiopia for one final altitude. The Simien Mountains rise above 14,000 feet, with cliffs that drop straight down for hundreds of feet into the valleys below. The terrain is uneven, the air is thin, and the wind moves constantly across the ridges. This is one of the most dramatic mountain landscapes on the African continent and one of the least represented in global travel imagery. It is also home to the gelada, a primate found only in the Ethiopian highlands and one of the few species on Earth that lives by instinct at the edge of vertical drops. You watch them in the morning, scattered across grassy slopes near the cliff edges, pulling vegetation from the ground with careful hands. They do not move away from the edge. They sit directly beside it, because as the day shifts, they descend onto narrow ledges carved into the cliff walls, barely wide enough to stand on, where they sleep. It is not comfort. It is strategy. Predators cannot reach them on those ledges, and so they have traded ease for survival. The trade defines them. It also defines this whole landscape. Across the ridges, small villages sit low against the wind. Fields are carved into impossibly steep slopes by hand. Nothing here uses force to overpower nature. Everything finds a position that holds and stays there. This is a different kind of natural wonder. Not a single dramatic formation, but an entire system shaped by altitude, exposure, and adaptation. Preserved in a place most of the world never thinks about when it imagines Africa. The most famous places on Earth are famous for a reason, but fame is not the same as importance. Across the world, there are landscapes that match or exceed the great icons in scale, beauty, and depth, and that almost no one ever sees, because they sit outside the small set of stories the world keeps repeating about itself. A plateau worn down until only its strongest fragments remain. A mountain with a doorway carved through it by erosion. A vanished sea turned into a labyrinth. A record of geological time written in color across the ground. A prehistoric forest hiding inside a country imagined as desert. A continent slowly tearing itself open in the heat. Churches cut downward into solid rock by hand 900 years ago, still in use today. A single ancient mountain standing alone above the cloud. A community of primates choosing to sleep on the edge of cliffs because the edge is safer than the ground. None of these are imaginary. None of them are exaggerated. They are simply quieter than the famous ones. Harder to reach, harder to package, harder to reduce to a single image. And maybe that is exactly why they matter. Because the planet is not finished revealing itself. The wonders most people know are only a small share of what exists. The rest are still out there, standing, eroding, forming, glowing, shifting, adapting, waiting in places the headlines never look. And once you start paying attention to them, the world stops feeling fully mapped. It starts feeling quietly much larger than you were told.
Yeah.